The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, casting long shadows across the bustling terminal. Travelers hurried in every direction, rolling suitcases, checking phones, calling out to kids who'd wandered too far. Among them stood a small girl with 2 braids, clutching a stuffed rabbit so worn its ears flopped sideways. Her name was Amari, and today was her first time flying alone. She wasn't supposed to be nervous. Her mom had walked her through everything the night before: how to find her gate, what to say to the flight attendant, where to sit. "You're a big girl now," her mom had said, smoothing down Amari's collar with gentle hands. "Grandma's waiting for you in Denver, and you'll be there before you know it." Amari believed her mostly, but standing in the middle of all that noise and motion, with her backpack too heavy and her throat tight, she felt anything but big. She kept her eyes on the gate number printed on her boarding pass, repeating it like a mantra: B-17, B-17, B-17. A gate agent with a kind smile checked her paperwork and handed her a bright yellow lanyard labeled "Unaccompanied Minor." "You're all set, sweetheart," she said. "Just follow the crew once you're on board. They'll take good care of you." Amari nodded, but her stomach still fluttered as she walked down the jet bridge. The plane smelled like cleaning spray and warm air. A flight attendant stood at the entrance, clipboard in hand, scanning boarding passes. She had perfectly coiffed, silver-streaked hair, a crisp navy uniform, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Name?" she asked without looking up. "Amari," the girl whispered. The woman glanced at her, then at the yellow lanyard. "Ah, you're the one flying solo." Her tone wasn't unkind, just brisk, like she was reading from a checklist in her head. "Seat 23F window, don't wander. Don't touch anything that isn't yours. And for heaven's sake, don't spill anything." Amari swallowed and nodded again. She made her way down the narrow aisle, careful not to bump into anyone's knees. Her seat was near the back, beside an empty middle seat and a man reading a newspaper. She slid in by the window, tucked Juniper, the rabbit, into the seatbelt beside her, and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Outside, ground crew moved with practiced efficiency, and the plane hummed softly beneath her. A few rows ahead, Elias Thorne settled into his seat with a quiet sigh. He wasn't supposed to be working today. In fact, he'd just wrapped up a week-long behavioral analysis seminar in Atlanta and was looking forward to a quiet flight home to Colorado. He wore a plain gray sweater and dark slacks, nothing that screamed federal agent, but his eyes missed little. Years of field work had trained him to notice the small things: the way someone's shoulders tense, the shift in tone when they lie, the flicker of fear in a child's eyes. He'd spotted Amari the moment she boarded. Something about the way she held herself, so small, so still, tugged at him. He didn't stare, but he kept her in his peripheral vision just in case. The plane taxied slowly toward the runway. Over the intercom, the captain welcomed everyone aboard and reminded passengers to keep their seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants moved down the aisles, checking that trays were stowed and seats were upright. The same woman who'd greeted Amari at the door now approached with a drink cart. "Juice or water for the minor?" she asked, not unkindly, but with a clipped efficiency that felt more like obligation than warmth. "Juice, please," Amari said softly. The woman handed her a small plastic cup with a sealed lid. "Open it carefully," she said. "And don't spill it," Amari nodded. Her fingers trembled slightly as she peeled back the foil seal. She'd never opened one of these before. At home, her mom always did it for her. She tugged too hard and a splash of apple juice leapt out, landing on her jeans and the armrest. "Oh," she gasped, eyes wide. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." The flight attendant's expression hardened. "Again with the mess?" she said, louder than necessary. A few nearby passengers turned to look. "Honestly, some people don't know how to behave on a plane." Amari froze. Her cheeks burned. She fumbled for a napkin from the seat-back pocket, but her hands shook so badly she dropped it. The woman leaned in, voice low but sharp. "You think this is a playground? You're on $100 million aircraft, not your living room." "I'm really sorry," Amari whispered, tears welling up. "I'll clean it." Before she could finish, the woman's hand shot out and slapped Amari's wrist, hard enough to sting, hard enough to make the girl jerk back with a sharp inhale. "Keep your hands still," the attendant snapped, "and stop making a scene." The cabin fell quiet for a heartbeat. A man 2 rows over looked away quickly. An older woman bit her lip but said nothing, but Elias saw it all. He didn't move right away. His training told him to assess, to gather facts, to avoid escalating unless necessary. But his gut twisted. That wasn't discipline. That was cruelty. And it wasn't random, it was targeted. He'd watched how the woman's eyes narrowed when Amari first boarded, how her tone shifted the moment she saw the girl's skin, how she'd singled her out from the start. Amari sat perfectly still now, staring at her lap, blinking fast to keep the tears from falling. She didn't cry out. She didn't complain. She just shrank into herself as if trying to disappear. Elias exhaled slowly. He waited until the drink cart rolled past, until the attendant's back was turned. Then he unbuckled his seatbelt, stood, and walked quietly down the aisle. He didn't loom over Amari. Instead, he crouched beside her seat so they were at eye level. "Hey," he said, voice soft. "My name's Elias, you okay?" Amari looked up, startled. For a second, she just stared at him, this stranger with kind eyes and a calm voice. Then her bottom lip trembled. She nodded, but it was the kind of nod that meant the opposite. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," he said, pulling a clean napkin from his own pocket. "But I've got an extra seat next to me if you'd rather not sit here alone." She hesitated, glanced at the empty middle seat, then at the flight attendant, who was now chatting with a passenger up front, completely unaware. "Okay," she whispered. Elias helped her gather her things, backpack, boarding past Juniper, and walked her back to his row. He made sure she was settled before taking his own seat again. He didn't ask questions right away, just offered her a bottle of water from his carry-on and said, "Take your time." Outside, the plane lifted off the ground, Atlanta shrinking below them. Clouds drifted past the window like soft cotton. Amari held Juniper tightly and finally let a single tear fall. Elias watched the flight attendant move through the cabin again, all polished smiles and practiced charm for the other passengers. But he'd seen what she really was, and he knew this wasn't over, because what happened to Amari wasn't just a bad moment. It was a pattern, and patterns in his line of work always left traces. He pulled out his phone, opened a voice memo app, and began recording, not to confront, not to accuse, but to remember. Every word, every tone, every detail mattered, because someone had to speak up for the girl who was too scared to speak for herself. And sometimes, justice starts with something as simple as noticing. The hum of the airplane's engine settled into a steady rhythm as it climbed above the clouds, sunlight glinting off the wingtips. Amari sat quietly beside Elias, her small hands wrapped around the water bottle he'd given her. She hadn't said much since moving seats, but her shoulders had relaxed just a little. Juniper the rabbit rested in her lap, one floppy ear tucked under her thumb like a secret comfort. Elias didn't push her to talk. He knew better. Instead, he opened a magazine he wasn't really reading and let the silence stretch, soft and safe. After a few minutes, Amari peeked up at him. "You're not mad at me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Mad?" Elias turned to her, eyebrows raised. "Why would I be mad?" "Because I made a mess," she said, eyes dropping again. "And I cried and I didn't do what she said." He shook his head slowly. "You didn't do anything wrong, Amari. Spilling a little juice? That happens to grown-ups too. And crying when someone hurts you. That's not weakness, that's being human." She looked at him like she wasn't sure whether to believe it. "Tell me something," he said gently. "Have you flown by yourself before?" She shook her head. "First time. Mom said I'm big enough now, but I was scared. That's okay. Flying alone is a big deal." "You're doing great." A tiny smile flickered at the corner of her mouth. Gone almost as soon as it appeared, but Elias saw it. They talked a little more after that. Not about the slap, not about the flight attendant, but about Denver, about her grandma's garden, about how Juniper had been with her since she was 3. Elias listened like every word mattered because to her it did. Up front, the flight attendants began the beverage service again. Amari tensed slightly as the cart rolled closer. Elias noticed. He kept his voice low but steady. "If you don't want to look, that's fine. I'll keep an eye out." She nodded, turning toward the window. Then came the sharp click of heels on the aisle floor. Corinne, the flight attendant, stopped short when she saw Amari sitting next to Elias. Her eyes narrowed. "What's this?" she asked, voice tight. "You can't just move unaccompanied minors without crew approval." Elias looked up calmly. "I spoke with the gate agent before boarding. She confirmed I could assist if needed, and given what happened earlier, I thought it was best." Corinne crossed her arms. What happened earlier was a child making a mess and refusing to listen. I handled it. You slapped her, Elias said, voice still even, but firmer now. I tapped her wrist to get her attention, Corinne corrected, glancing around to see if anyone was watching. A few passengers were. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. I'm a federal agent, Elias said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. And I saw what you did. I also heard what you said. Her face flushed, but she recovered quickly. Oh, so now you're threatening me? Because a little girl spilled juice? I'm not threatening anyone, he replied. I'm stating facts. And if you continue speaking to her or about her that way, I'll document it. Officially, Corinne scoffed, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. She straightened her uniform and forced a smile. Fine. Enjoy your flight. She turned sharply and pushed the cart away, muttering something under her breath, something that sounded like always someone playing hero. Amari hadn't moved. She kept her gaze fixed on the clouds outside, but her fingers gripped Juniper tighter. She hates me, she whispered. No, Elias said. She's angry at herself and taking it out on the wrong person. That's not your fault. He waited until Corinne was at the other end of the cabin before pulling out his phone again. He opened his notes app and began typing. 1:47 p.m. Flight attendant Corinne Voss approached minor after relocation. Used dismissive language. Denied physical contact but toned defensive. Witnesses present. Rows 20-25. He didn't show it to Amari. He just wanted to be ready. As the flight settled into cruising altitude, other passengers began to relax, some watching movies, others dozing off. But Elias stayed alert. He knew how these things often played out. People saw something wrong, felt uncomfortable, then told themselves it wasn't their place to act. He'd been that person once, early in his career, before he learned that silence sometimes does more harm than speaking up. About an hour into the flight, a woman from row 22 walked back and paused beside their seats. She looked to be in her late 60s with silver curls and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She glanced at Amari, then at Elias. Excuse me, she said softly. I couldn't help but notice what happened earlier. I just wanted to say, thank you, Elias nodded. You saw it too? Oh yes, she said, lowering her voice. I've been a teacher for 42 years. I know the difference between discipline and cruelty. What that woman did? That wasn't about spilled juice. Amari looked up at her, surprised. The woman smiled gently. You're a brave girl, sweetheart. And you didn't deserve that. Amari's eyes filled again, but this time she didn't look away. Thank you, she whispered. The woman patted her shoulder lightly before returning to her seat. That small moment changed something. It wasn't just Elias anymore. Someone else had seen it. Someone else cared. Later, when the snack service came around, Elias made sure Amari got her choice of crackers and juice. This time, he opened it for her. She managed a real smile as she took a sip. You know, he said as the plane began its gradual descent toward Denver. What happened today? It's not the end of your story. It's just one page. And you get to decide what comes next. She thought about that for a while. Then she asked, will she get in trouble? I don't know yet, he admitted. But I promise I'll do everything I can to make sure she can't do that to another kid. Amari nodded slowly. Okay. As the Rocky Mountains came into view through the window, snow-capped and majestic, Elias felt a quiet resolve settle in his chest. This wasn't just about filing a complaint or getting an apology. It was about making sure a 9-year-old girl never again felt like she didn't belong in a place as ordinary as an airplane seat. When the plane touched down in Denver, Elias stayed with Amari until they reached the gate. Her grandmother was already there, standing near the arrival door with a handmade sign that read, Welcome, Amari, in bright purple letters. The moment she saw her granddaughter, her face lit up. But then she took in Amari's red-rimmed eyes and the way she clung to Elias's sleeve. Baby, what happened? She asked, dropping to her knees and pulling Amari into a tight hug. Amari buried her face in her grandma's shoulder for a long moment, before whispering, It's okay now. Elias introduced himself and explained briefly what had occurred, keeping it factual, not dramatic. He gave the woman his contact information and assured her he'd follow up with the airline. Before they left, Amari turned back to him. Will I see you again? Probably not, he said honestly. But that's okay. You've got your grandma, your home in Juniper, and you've got your voice. Don't ever be afraid to use it. She hugged him then, quick and fierce, and ran to catch up with her grandmother. Elias watched them go, the yellow lanyard now tucked safely in the grandma's purse. He took a deep breath, pulled out his phone, and opened his email. Subject line: Formal complaint. Flight 482, October 8, 2025. Incident involving minor passenger. He began to type, not with anger, but with purpose. Because sometimes, doing the right thing starts with a single sentence, and sometimes that sentence can change everything. The morning after the flight, Elias sat at his kitchen table with a steaming mug of black coffee and his laptop open. Outside, Denver's autumn air was crisp, leaves swirling in quiet gusts across the sidewalk. But inside, his mind was still back on that plane, on the sharp sound of a slap, the way Amari had frozen, the cold dismissal in the flight attendant's voice. He hadn't slept much, not because he was angry, but because he knew what came next mattered. He opened the email he'd drafted the night before and read it one more time. It was clear, factual, and calm, just how official complaints should be. He included the flight number, time, seat locations, and a detailed account of what he'd witnessed. He attached the short audio clip he'd recorded during his exchange with the attendant, making sure to blur any background voices to protect other passengers' privacy. Then he hit send to the airline's customer relations department, the Department of Transportation's Aviation Consumer Protection Office, and a civil rights advocacy group that specialized in transportation discrimination. He didn't expect a reply right away. Big systems move slowly, but he also knew silence could be dangerous. If no one followed up, the incident would vanish into a file labeled "Resolved" with a $200 travel voucher and a generic apology. And that wouldn't be justice. That would be convenience. Meanwhile, across town, Amari sat curled up on her grandmother's couch, wrapped in a quilt stitched with sunflowers. She'd slept late, exhausted from the emotional toll of the day before. Her grandma hadn't pushed her to talk, just made her favorite pancakes and let her watch cartoons with Juniper propped beside her. But around mid-morning, Amari finally spoke. "She called me you people," she said quietly, eyes on the TV but not really watching. Her grandmother paused while folding laundry. "Who did, baby?" "The lady on the plane. After she hit me. She said, 'You people never learn.'" The room went still. Her grandmother sat down slowly, her hands resting gently on Amari's knees. "Look at me," she said softly. Amari turned, tears already forming. "You hear me now, those words? They say everything about her, and nothing about you. You are loved. You belong everywhere you go. And no one, not ever, gets to make you feel small for being who you are." Amari nodded, but the hurt was deep. It wasn't just the slap. It was the message behind it, that she was a problem just for existing. That same afternoon, an unexpected email landed in Elias's inbox. The sender was Dolores Finch, a retired elementary school principal who'd been seated in row 22. She'd seen the whole thing. "I've spent my life teaching children to be kind, respectful, and brave," she wrote. "What I witnessed on that flight broke my heart. I filed my own complaint this morning, but I wanted you to know you weren't alone in speaking up. That little girl deserved better, and so do all the others who might come after her." Elias read the message twice. Then he replied with a simple thank you. He didn't know it yet, but Dolores's statement would become a key piece of the puzzle. 3 days later, the airline responded. The email was polite, polished, and painfully vague. It expressed sincere regret for any discomfort experienced, assured him the matter was under internal review, and offered Amari a $200 voucher for future travel. No mention of the slap, no acknowledgement of the language used, just a tidy corporate bow wrapped around a raw wound. Elias stared at the screen, jaw tight. He'd expected this, but it still stung. He called the number listed for customer relations. After 20 minutes on hold and 3 transfers, he reached a supervisor named Greg. "Mr. Thorne," Greg said, voice smooth and rehearsed. "We take all passenger concerns seriously. Our team is reviewing the incident thoroughly. Then you'll be reviewing audio evidence, witness statements, and the fact that a minor was physically struck by a crew member," Elias said evenly. There was a pause. "We're aware of the allegations." "Allegations?" Elias repeated. I was there, I saw it. Another passenger confirmed it. This isn't speculation. Greg sighed as if Elias were being difficult. Our policy is to protect employee privacy during investigations. We can't comment further at this time. Then let me be clear, Elias said. If this ends with a voucher and a shrug, I'll go public. Not to shame the airline, but to demand accountability. Because what happened wasn't just unprofessional, it was dehumanizing. Another pause. Longer this time. I'll escalate your concerns to senior management, Greg finally said. Elias hung up, knowing it wouldn't be enough. So he reached out to someone who understood the system from the inside. A civil rights attorney named Nia Patel, who'd built her career fighting bias in public spaces. They'd met years ago at a conference on ethical policing. He trusted her. Over a video call that evening, he laid out everything. The flight details, the audio, Dolores' statement, the airline's response. Nia listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each sentence. This isn't isolated, she said when he finished. We've seen similar cases. Flight attendants singling out black children for harsher treatment using coded language, escalating minor issues into behavior problems. It's part of a larger pattern. Can we do something? Elias asked. We can, she said, but it has to be strategic. If we push too hard too fast, they'll circle the wagons. If we're too soft, they'll bury it. We need to make it impossible to ignore. Her plan was careful and precise. First, she'd send a formal letter to the airline's legal department, outlining potential violations of federal anti-discrimination laws. Second, she'd request a meeting with Amari's family with their full consent to discuss next steps. Third, she'd connect with advocacy groups to see if this could become part of a broader push for industry-wide training, reforms. But none of it would happen without Amari's grandmother agreeing. That conversation took place a week after the flight, in the cozy living room of a quiet Denver neighborhood. Nia sat across from Amari's grandmother, speaking gently, respectfully. She didn't promise miracles. She explained the risks, the media attention, the emotional toll, the possibility of pushback. But she also explained the power of standing firm. After a long silence, Amari's grandmother looked at her granddaughter, who was coloring at the kitchen table, humming softly to herself. She's already carrying this, the grandmother said finally. If doing something might keep it from happening to another child, then we'll do it. With that decision made, things began to move. The airline, sensing real legal pressure, suddenly became more responsive. A senior executive reached out directly to Elias, offering a face-to-face meeting. They flew him to their headquarters, not as a passenger this time, but as someone they couldn't afford to ignore. In a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows, Elias sat across from two executives and a human resources director. They apologized, this time sincerely. They confirmed Corinne Voss had been placed on administrative leave. They admitted the initial response was inadequate, and they revealed something new. Cabin footage from near the galley had captured part of the interaction. Audio wasn't clear, but body language was. Corinne's aggressive posture, Amari's recoil, the swift, sharp motion of her hand. We're reviewing all training protocols, one executive said, and we're considering mandatory anti-bias workshops for all customer-facing staff. Elias listened, but he didn't celebrate yet. Promises were easy. Change was hard. Back home, he called Amari's grandmother. They're starting to listen, he told her. But we keep pushing until it sticks. She thanked him, her voice thick with emotion. You didn't have to do this, she said. Yes, Elias replied softly. I did. Because in the end, it wasn't about one flight, one attendant, or even one little girl. It was about who gets to feel safe in the world, and who gets treated like they're a problem just for being there. And that was worth fighting for. News has a way of slipping through cracks no one expects. It started with a post on an aviation industry forum, anonymous but detailed. A retired flight attendant wrote about a disturbing incident on a recent domestic flight, describing how a child had been mistreated by a crew member and how an off-duty federal agent had stepped in. She didn't name names, but she included enough specifics, flight number, route, timeline, that people started connecting dots. Within a day, a local Denver reporter picked it up. She reached out to the airline for comment. At first, they gave the usual line. We take all concerns seriously and are conducting a thorough review. But when the reporter mentioned she'd spoken to a witness and had partial audio, the tone shifted. 2 days later, the airline issued a public statement. Not a vague apology this time, but a direct acknowledgement. We deeply regret the distress caused to a young passenger on Flight 482. Following a comprehensive internal investigation, the employee involved has been terminated effective immediately. We are committed to ensuring such an incident never occurs again. The news spread fast. National outlets picked it up. Social media buzzed, not with outrage alone, but with stories of similar experiences. Parents shared times their children had been singled out on planes, trains, even in stores, told to calm down for simply existing while black. Teachers, nurses, bus drivers chimed in with their own accounts of watching bias unfold and feeling powerless to stop it. But amid the noise, Elias stayed quiet. He didn't give interviews. He didn't post online. He knew the story wasn't his to tell. It belonged to Amari and her family. Still, the pressure worked. The airline's CEO, a woman named Lillian Cho, who'd taken the helm just a year earlier with promises of human-centered service, reached out personally. She wanted to meet Amari's grandmother, not through lawyers, not through PR teams, but face-to-face. They met in a small sunlit room at the airline's Denver office. No cameras, no press. Just two women, a pot of tea, and a shared understanding that something broken needed mending. Lillian didn't make excuses. She listened as Amari's grandmother spoke, not just about the slap, but about the words that followed, the look in the attendant's eyes, the way her granddaughter now hesitated before asking for help. "I don't want money," the grandmother said plainly. "I want to know my granddaughter, or any child like her won't be treated like a nuisance just for boarding a plane." Lillian nodded. "Then let's make sure of it." What followed was weeks of quiet negotiation. Not a lawsuit, but a resolution built on accountability and change. The airline agreed to 3 things: a financial settlement to cover counseling for Amari, because healing costs more than a voucher, a public apology published in major newspapers, and most importantly, a partnership with a national civil rights organization to redesign their customer service training from the ground up. The new program would include mandatory workshops on implicit bias, cultural humility, and de-escalation, not just for flight attendants, but for gate agents, baggage handlers, and call center staff. Role-playing scenarios would feature real stories, anonymized but honest. And crucially, there would be a clear, anonymous reporting system for passengers who felt mistreated. No more getting lost in voicemail loops. Meanwhile, Corinne Voss didn't go quietly. 6 weeks after her termination, she filed a lawsuit against the airline and Elias, claiming defamation and wrongful termination. She insisted the tap on Amari's wrist had been misinterpreted, that her words had been taken out of context, and that she was being made a scapegoat for political correctness. Her legal team sent aggressive letters. They demanded Elias retract his statement. They hinted at dragging Amari into depositions, but Nia, the attorney, was ready. She filed a motion to dismiss, attaching Elias's audio recording, Dolores' sworn statement, and the airline's own internal findings, including testimony from another crew member who admitted Corinne had made similar comments about certain types of passengers before. The judge reviewed the evidence and ruled swiftly. The case lacked merit. It was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it could never be refiled. Corinne vanished from public view after that. Rumor had it she moved to a small town in Idaho, took a job at a grocery store, and never worked in aviation again. Back in Denver, Amari started seeing a child therapist named Dr. Rivera, who specialized in trauma and resilience. At first, Amari barely spoke during sessions, but slowly she began to open up, drawing pictures of airplanes, writing letters to Juniper about being brave, even practicing what she'd say if someone ever treated her unfairly again. One afternoon, she asked her grandmother, "Do you think that lady was always mean?" Her grandmother thought for a moment. "I think she learned to see some people as less than others. And instead of questioning that, she let it grow. But that doesn't mean you have to carry her mistake in your heart." Amari nodded. She was starting to understand what happened wasn't about her worth. It was about someone else's blindness. Elias checked in occasionally, not as a hero but as a quiet presence. He sent postcards from his travels: a lighthouse in Maine, a desert sunset in New Mexico, a quiet park in Seattle. On the back, he'd write simple things: Saw this and thought of your courage. Hope you're having a good week. Amari kept everyone in a shoebox under her bed. Then came the day the airline invited Elias to speak at their annual leadership summit. Not as a critic, but as a partner in change. He stood before hundreds of managers and crew trainers and said something simple. Most of you will never face a moment like the one on that flight, but you'll face smaller ones every day. A passenger who seems difficult, a child who's fidgeting, a voice that sounds different. In those moments, you get to choose. Will you see a problem or a person? Because how you answer shapes more lives than you know. The room was silent when he finished. Then one by one, people began to clap. Not out of politeness, but recognition. Change doesn't happen in a single courtroom or press release. It happens in quiet choices, in a flight attendant kneeling to talk to a scared child at eye level, in a gate agent double-checking a name instead of assuming, in a company choosing long-term integrity over short-term comfort, and sometimes it starts with one man noticing a little girl flinch and deciding that noticing isn't enough. Amari didn't know all the details of the legal filings or corporate meetings, but she felt the shift. When she flew again 6 months later, this time with her grandmother beside her, the crew treated her like any other passenger, smiled, asked her name, offered her a choice of snacks. She still held Juniper tightly. But this time she didn't shrink into her seat. She looked out the window as the plane lifted into the sky, and for the first time, she felt like she belonged there, just as she was. Time has a quiet way of stitching wounds you didn't think would ever close. A year after the flight, Amari stood in front of her fourth-grade class holding a trifold poster board covered in colorful drawings and neat handwriting. Her project was titled, Kindness in Unexpected Places, and at the center was a simple sketch. A man in a gray sweater kneeling beside a small girl on an airplane, both looking out the window together. Beneath it, in careful block letters, she'd written, "He didn't have to help, but he did." Her teacher had asked if she wanted to share the story behind it. Amari hesitated at first. She still didn't like being the center of attention, but then she nodded. She spoke softly but clearly about how scary it felt to fly alone, about the sharp sting on her wrist, and about the stranger who saw her when no one else would. She didn't mention names. She didn't need to. What mattered was the lesson, that one person choosing to care can change everything. After class, 3 of her classmates came up to her. One whispered, "That happened to my cousin on a bus." Another said, "My mom says stuff like that happens all the time." Amari just listened, then handed each of them a small paper rabbit she'd made from construction paper. Juniper's cousins, she called them. "So you remember you're not alone," she said. Meanwhile, Elias sat in a conference room in Washington, D.C., not in a suit, but in the same kind of plain clothes he'd worn on that flight. He'd been invited to speak at a national transportation safety summit, not as an FBI agent, but as someone who'd witnessed how bias can slip into everyday systems and how ordinary people can stop it. He didn't talk about laws or policies first. He started with Amari. "I didn't do anything heroic," he told the room full of airline executives, transit directors, and federal regulators. "I just refused to look away." And that's the point. Real change doesn't always come from grand gestures. It comes from people deciding in small moments that someone else's dignity matters as much as their own. His words landed differently than he expected. After his talk, a woman from the Department of Transportation pulled him aside. "We've been working on new guidelines for handling bias complaints in air travel," she said. Your case, Amari's case, helped push it over the finish line. 2 months later, the U.S. government announced a new rule. All major airlines would be required to log, investigate, and publicly report passenger complaints related to discrimination or unfair treatment, not just internally, but in annual transparency reports anyone could read. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and it carried echoes of a little girl's quiet courage. Back in Denver, Amari's grandmother kept a folder of updates, newspaper clippings, letters from the airline, a printed copy of the new federal guideline. She didn't show them to Amari often. She didn't want her granddaughter to feel like her pain had to be useful. But she kept them as proof that speaking up mattered. One spring afternoon, as they planted marigolds in the backyard, Amari asked, "Do you think that man remembers me?" Her grandmother smiled, patting soil around a bright orange bloom. I think he remembers what you taught him. Because that was the truth neither of them had expected. Elias had gone into that flight thinking he was protecting a child. But in the end, Amari had reminded him why his work mattered. Not just catching criminals, but protecting the quiet humanity in everyday life. He still carried that lesson with him. At the FBI, he began mentoring younger agents on the importance of bystander intervention. Not just in emergencies, but in the small daily choices that shape culture. He pushed for more collaboration with community advocates, not as outsiders, but as partners. And whenever he boarded a plane now, he always glanced toward the back rows. Just in case another child needed someone to see them. The airline, for its part, didn't just implement the new training, it expanded it. Within 18 months, every new hire went through a full-day workshop on cultural humility, led not by corporate trainers, but by educators and community leaders. They included real scenarios, not scripts. One exercise even used Amari's story, fully anonymized with permission from her family. Trainees had to respond not as employees, but as humans. What would you do? What would you say? How would you make that child feel safe? A junior flight attendant named Tessa, who joined 6 months after the incident, later wrote a letter to the airline's leadership. I used to think customer service was about rules and efficiency, she said. Now I know it's about respect. That shift started with one story, and it changed how I show up every single day. Years passed. Amari grew taller, her braids longer, her voice steadier. She still flew to visit family, and though she never forgot what happened, it no longer defined her. Instead, it became part of her strength. The reason she stood up for a new student being teased. The reason she asked thoughtful questions in history class about fairness and justice. The reason she dreamed of becoming a counselor one day. When she was 13, she wrote a short essay for a school contest about moments that shape us. She didn't win first place, but her teacher framed it and hung it in the hallway. The last line read, "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is believe you deserve to be treated kindly, even when someone tries to tell you otherwise." Elias read that line when Amari's grandmother sent him a photo of the essay, years after their paths had crossed. He didn't reply right away. He just sat with it for a while, looking out his window at the Colorado mountains, the same peaks he'd seen the day the plane landed in Denver. He thought about how easy it would have been to stay in his seat that day, to tell himself it wasn't his business, to assume someone else would handle it. But he hadn't, and because of that, a ripple had spread far beyond that airplane, touching classrooms, boardrooms, government offices, and the hearts of strangers who'd never even met Amari. None of it erased what happened, but it gave it meaning. One evening, long after the headlines faded and the lawsuits ended, Elias received a small package in the mail. No return address, just his name and city. Inside was a handmade card, decorated with glitter and careful cursive. On the front, a drawing of a rabbit wearing sunglasses sitting in a window seat. Inside it said, "Thank you for seeing me. Amari," he smiled. Then he tucked the card into the back of his desk drawer, the one where he kept things that reminded him why he chose this life. Because in the end, justice isn't just about punishment. It's about restoration. It's about making sure a child can board a plane without fear. It's about turning pain into protection for others. And sometimes it's as simple as a quiet thank you that echoes across years. The world didn't change overnight, but in thousands of small ways, on flights, in schools, in conversations around kitchen tables, it began to bend toward something kinder. And that, more than anything, was the real victory.